The last bullet point is also a mixture. Improved community awareness is a valid output. But the latter part of the statement, improved individual practices, may be a higher level than an output. Now I'd like to talk about activities in the project framework. Perhaps surprisingly, these can be quite problematic. I don't know, perhaps people are getting tired by the time they get to the fourth row. One point I'd like to make is that every element in the project framework should add value. If it doesn't, we shouldn't waste our time and effort doing it. And a little bit later I'll talk about how activities can add value. But just to give you an example at this stage, there is no point in an activity simply restating an output. So if the output is a power station built, an activity to build a power station doesn't add value. Activities are the transformation process of turning inputs into outputs. How do we get from inputs to outputs? What are the steps along the way? These are the activities. These are some of the things to check when considering activities in the project framework. Firstly, we find, in fact, that they are most conspicuous by their absence. That is, people just don't include them at all. Or they supposedly include them as output stroke activities or input stroke activities. And as I mentioned before, simply restating the output as an activity does not add value. In fact, we can think of activities as the main milestone events in carrying out a project. Now at this point probably I'm going to digress a little bit because we need to consider what happens to the project framework after a project is approved. For loan projects, the project framework goes in two directions. Firstly, it goes to the Project Administration Memorandum, and in that document it gives rise to the format for executing agency progress reports, so that those elements that we've included in the project framework as being the result areas and targets and indicators are likely to, or should be, monitored and reported by the executing agency. Similarly, the project framework provides the basis within ADB for our project performance report. And once again, the results area, targets and indicators are picked up out of the project framework and included in the project performance report for subsequent monitoring. So if we have activities included in the project framework, then they will be picked up, ideally, in executing agency progress reports and ADB's project performance report. Of course, there's a similar process for TAs in that we now have the Technical Assistance Performance Report. The key activities should be the milestone events that will enable us to track the project's progress. Many of ADB's projects are extended. In fact, over the last 5 years, more than 80%. And more than 60% have had to be extended 2 or more times. This shows us that we do not have realistic implementation schedules for our projects, or that we are not tracking emerging problems effectively in order to take corrective action. It is the timely completion of the key activities that are on the critical path that will tell us whether the project implementation is going off schedule or not. So this is why I say that the activities in the project framework should be the key milestone events. Finally, and again as I mentioned before, the activities should be linked to their outputs by a numbering system, so that those that are reading the project framework can be quite clear as to which activities will contribute to the achievement of which outputs. I'd like you to comment on these activities which come from a project in India. My comment on these activities is that they're not particularly helpful. The first and the third are really a restatement of the outputs. The others are activities, but they're not phrased as the key milestone events that I would expect would be implicit in a project of this nature. As such, I really wonder whether they add much value. Here's a second group of activities I'd like you to comment on. These come from the Small Towns Development Project in Laos. My comment on these activities is that the last bullet point captures the essence of the activities in a sector loan. Under a sector loan, there are a series of steps that have to be completed, including sub-project identification, preparation of feasibility and detailed design, and so on. And it is these activities that would form the main milestone events. And they would be accompanied, of course, by time-bound targets and indicators in the next column. The other points are really activities which could be fitted under the sub-project identification, preparation, and so on. Of course, it goes without saying that these activities should be numbered according to the outputs to which they will contribute. As a third set of activities, I've chosen those from the Afghanistan Agriculture Sector Program Loan. My thoughts on this activity statement is that it's not particularly helpful. It doesn't add value in terms of defining the key milestone events along the way to successful implementation of this program loan. For example, under a program loan, legislation is often required to be passed. Now, legislation has to go through a series of steps. It has to be drafted, there has to be a consultation process, redrafting occurs, it then has to be passed by a legislature or parliament, and it then probably has to be gazetted before it finally becomes law. Now, these various steps along the way can be seen as the important milestone events which will help us track whether this program loan is going to be implemented according to the planned schedule or not.